Hello and welcome back to Art with Mr. Mariani. I'm your host, Mr. Mariani, and this is part 2 of a 2-part series. So if you didn't see the first video, it is important that you go back now and watch that first video. In that first video, we discussed the different techniques of shading. So if you jump forward to this lesson, you're not going to know which technique to implement in your particular still life. So today we're going to be looking at Caravaggio's Basket of Fruit. This was painted in 1597 and finished into the 1600s, so it took him over 3 years to complete this work of art. We're going to be setting up a still life today, so a couple things that I want you to notice is how he's implementing value into a still life. So you can see he has a light source, he has contrast, he has depth, he's implementing all these things into this still life. This is one of the most famous still lifes of all time, and when you study still lifes, Caravaggio is definitely put his at the top. So our next step is we're going to go ahead and set up a still life. We're going to start with a contour line drawing and draw that still life, and then we're going to implement some shading. Let's go ahead and get started.
At Caravaggio's Basket of Fruit, and then we're going to look at my still life, and we're going to talk about desaturating it, which means we're taking the color out of it so that you can see the lights in the dark. It helps in terms of adding value, or shading. So what I can do if I'm in Photoshop is I can adjust the image, and I'm going to first make it black and white. It's a little bit easier to see the desaturation, and then I'm going to go again, and I'm going to adjust the contrast. Oh, I'll get rid of that. Adjustments, and we could also look at threshold. Threshold's interesting because then what happens is we see just the darks and just the lights, and it kind of breaks apart like this. Okay? We're going to go ahead and do the same thing where we're going to make it black and white. And okay. And then I'm going to go to my threshold again. And this one's a little bit harder to see, but you can start to see these dark and light areas. So instead of using threshold on this one, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to adjust the brightness and contrast. So I'm going to make it a lot brighter, and then I'm going to add a lot more contrast. And what's happening is you can start to see, if I was going to draw this, just my light and dark areas. Okay? So now we're going to move into our actual drawing of our still life. So let's move to that step.
The first thing you're going to need is a sheet of paper. Then you're going to need a pencil of some sort. And if you have shading pencils, that's more ideal in this situation. But I'm going to make a separate YouTube video on how to use the different shading pencils. Then what you're going to do is you need a still life. If you don't have a still life, you can always feel free to draw mine. My still life, I'm comparing it to Caravaggio's Basket of Fruit. Right now we only have these cuties, so this is what I'm going to be using. I'm going to go ahead and start off by drawing this. So if you're drawing my still life, you can follow along. If you're not, this might be a time for you to pause, go set up your still life, and then come back and restart the video. Okay, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to make contour lines. So I'm going to start off by I'm drawing mine, let's see. I kind of want to make mine from the side, but my bowl is too, actually, I'll draw it from the top down so you guys can see it. Let's do it that way. So I start off with my contour line for my bowl. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to start off by just drawing some of the tangerines, cuties that I see. What I'm doing is I'm starting with the foreground. The foreground are the ones at the top, and I'm moving to the background. The backgrounds are the ones at the bottom. And as you can see, this is a really quick drawing. It's not something that has to be super detailed just yet. The contour lines are just kind of laying out where things are going to go. Once we start adding in our value, we can go back and get into more details. Remember, the important thing is knowing where our light source is coming from. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to move my bowl over here. My light source is coming from this side. You can see that there is cast shadows on the sides of the bowl, and that's going to be important when I'm going ahead and drawing. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start off by making this first one right here. So I'm going to focus on this one right here, and I'm going to start off by going over those shapes a little bit. Now, we talked about many different ways of shading. Today, we're going to be working mostly with blending, but you could use some cross-hatching. We're going to talk a little bit about highlight. So to start off with, I notice on this side, my light's coming in through here. I notice that the side of my orange is darker. So remember we talked about getting those tight circles for blending. If you did not watch video 1, you do need to go back and see our different techniques on how to shade. That way, when it comes to starting to add in these details, you'll be able to do it. What I'm seeing here too is there's a little bit of shading on these creases. Don't be afraid to go too dark, but remember the amount of pressure you're putting on your pencil is how dark it's going to be on your paper. So the areas where there's less light filtering in, I'm going to want to push harder on my pencil. But the areas where there is light, I'm going to want to start to be a little bit lighter with my pencil. But I'm sticking with these small circles. The smaller the circles are, really, the better the shading is going to look. As you get lazy, your tendency are for the circles to get bigger and bigger. And what happens with that is you end up making something look a little bit less realistic. You take away a little bit of the value that you could have if you just kept these really small circles. I also really recommend not using a mechanical pencil. The mechanical pencil's lead is a lot harder, and it often will not sit as flat on the paper and also scratch up the paper a little bit. Okay, so I noticed there's a highlight right here. So where there's a highlight, I'm gonna go ahead and I'm gonna leave it alone. I'm not even gonna shade inside that. Now, if you went and you shaded inside an area that had a highlight, what you could do is you can use your eraser to subtract that shading. And that's a really good technique, and we use that a lot, especially with portraits and things that we wanna make look more realistic. The erasing and subtracting of some of the lead helps create depth. So, okay, this is a pretty good spot for this particular shape. Now, as I make my next cutie, what I'm gonna do is I know now that this is putting a little bit of a cast shadow on the one underneath it. Now what I do is I leave a little line in between those two. There's a little bit of space, and that's because I want to still see where one lets off. And there's a little highlight right here. So what I do is I go ahead and I make a contour, a little, or like a little bit of a space there for it right away. And what I'm doing right now is I'm following my contour lines very lightly. And I'm going in and taking those tight little circles. But I do know right next to my other fruit here, there is that cast shadow. And that cast shadow is really important. That helps create the illusion of depth. And I'm gonna keep going. So what I'm gonna do now is I'm gonna go ahead and I'm gonna fast forward through, and then I'm gonna touch base with you at the end of this video. But what I want you guys to do is get your still life ready, get a light source, make sure you're in a room that either has natural light coming in through a window or you have a lamp that you can focus onto your subject, and then go ahead and take your subject and try to create visual depth using value. Go ahead and get started. Okay, so we're back here, and what I want us to notice is that the cast shadows, the shadows that are going on the side of the bowl, take the same curve as the shape. Now what I'm going to do is, you can see I have graphite or lead all over the side of my hand. I'm going to go ahead and start doing some of my blending. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my finger, and I'm simply going to let my oil from my finger move some of that pencil around. The cast shadow, again, I'm still drawing with the shape. We talked about the contour lines. I'm still following those contour lines, but with my thumb this time. And I'm just moving around on top of this paper. Underneath here, it's a lot darker. There's not light hitting quite underneath there. And so what I'm gonna do now is I'm gonna talk about those highlights. We saw some areas like right here, there was a light, an over-saturated amount of light that hit that area. Up here there was as well. And even this little spot down here, there was some light that escaped to this background as well. Okay, so a couple things before you get moving on to the rest of your assignments. I want you to understand today we were using blending. We are adding in highlights. We are going to be blending using our fingers. If you have a blending stump, that works way better than your finger, but I know we're kind of limited in terms of resources, so your finger will work just fine for this particular assignment. All right, go ahead, get this done, and then send me your finished products. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me. My email is at the end of the video. Anything that you wanted to see that you maybe don't fully understand, don't be afraid to ask questions. That's what I'm here for. All right, can't wait to see your finished products and see you guys back here next week.